Okay, so welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 10, the Tzadik. We are on page 122 in the book, in the Tanya book, and we are in source sheet number 10 for chapter 10 in our source sheets, in our handouts. So, I know we start a lot of classes with an overview. We will do this again this week, and then we'll sort of let go of doing the overviews from now on. To date, what has happened is as follows. In the first half of chapter 1 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe asked roughly 6 or 7 important questions. We left those questions alone. You may not even remember them. If you have the handouts at home, anybody have the handouts at home, the back handouts from so if you go back to chapter 1, and this might be a good thing to do now, you'll be able to see, not this handout, but from chapter 1. Not chapter 9, which was last week, but chapter 1, which is all the way at the beginning of Tanya. And I'm happy to catch you up on those. If you'd like those handouts, I have them all.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll after class we'll touch base.
That's another question I was going to ask you after class. We'll talk about that later.
Good. Sounds good. So the Alter Rebbe asked about 6 or 7 questions in the first half of chapter 1, and then we left them to rest. We said now we're going to begin to explore the Tzadik, the Rasha, our spiritual makeup, our what our souls are made up of, etc. And then we'll get back to those questions. So we are getting close to answering those questions. Okay, that was the first half of chapter 1. We then went on, from then on, to, we introduced the animal soul and spoke about the animal soul. He actually does this at the beginning of the chapter, if you look inside. So far, the Tanya has given us a tour of the psyche, describing the animal soul. That was in chapters 1 and 6 through 8. Right. So at the beginning, right at the end of chapter 1, he introduces the first one that we have 2 souls, and he introduces the animal soul. But then we pause, and for chapters 2 through 5, we spoke about the godly soul. Then in chapters 6 through 8, right, and that was the end of our last season or series. We spoke about the animal soul. More importantly, we spoke about the source of the animal soul, kalipa, or negative energy. And eventually, last week, in chapter 9, we began to speak about their conflict. Right? I think it was titled "The War Inside You." Is that what was the name? Right?
Yeah.
The War Inside You, because we started to talk about what each one of them wants. Right? We introduced for the first time the verse that is originally said with regards to Yaakov and Esav. Right? That Jacob gives a blessing to the 2 of them, essentially. That each nation will conquer the other nation. What does that mean? That when Yaakov is up, Esav will be down. When Esav is up, Yaakov will be down. And we apply that statement to the Nefesh Elokit and the Nefesh Abahamit, in other words, to the godly soul, to the animal soul. In other words, when we are tapping into our godly soul and we're living godly lives, our animal soul ceases to exist. And I'm going to put that in air quotes because we're going to talk more about that today, whether it actually ceases to exist or not. Right? And unfortunately, for better or for worse, well, really for worse, when it's the opposite, when we're more in tune with our animal soul, our godly soul, quote unquote, ceases to exist. In other words, it lies dormant. It is, as we borrowed the term last week, a tale of one city, not a tale of 2 cities. There's only one city. There's only one thought, speech, and action. Right? There's only 3 thought, speech, and action. There's not 6 of them. 1 and 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 1. There are 20 powers, 10 powers of the godly soul, 10 powers of the animal soul, right? But they're both trying to rule over one city or one existence, one consciousness, which is our lives. Okay. And so in chapter 9, we introduced the war. In chapter 10, 11, 12, and 13, and really even 14, we are going to begin to answer those questions that we had at the beginning. Now that we understand what we're made up of, we are going to begin by answering some of those questions. So if you look at the beginning of chapter 10 in Rabbi Miller's Tanya here, right? So in his adaptation, he goes through where the questions will be answered. So let's review the 6 or 7 questions that were introduced, at the beginning of chapter 1. And we'll talk about where each of them is going to be answered. Most importantly, I want you to focus on which of them will be answered today, because this will serve as a barometer for you to know whether you grasp the concepts that we're going to introduce in today's lesson. If you'll have the answers to those, I think it's 2 questions, then you will definitely grasp the concepts well. Not just from this lesson, but from all the lessons that came up until today. Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. Okay, so on page 122. Now that we have some familiarity with the soul's architecture, the Tanya will begin to address a number of questions which remain unanswered from chapter 1. Namely, question number 1. What is the difference between a complete Tzadik and an incomplete Tzadik? To be answered in this chapter. Number 2. What is the difference between a complete Rasha and an incomplete Rasha? To be answered in chapter 11. Number 3. If a Beinoni, in other words an in-betweener, never transgresses, how is he different from a Tzadik? This will be answered in chapter 12. Number 4. How is it possible for a Tzadik such as Rabbah to mistakenly conclude that he is a Beinoni? Anybody remember that question? Mm-hmm. The Rabbah said, Kegona na Beinoni. We quoted Rabbah, about whom the Talmud says, what's the exact quote? 1 second. V'noda, and it was known, and he knew, the lo pasik pume migirsa, that his mouth never ceased from studying Torah. And yet he calls himself an in-betweener? Right? That was our question then. Right? What does it mean? How could he be an in-betweener if he's not a tzaddik? Right? And most importantly, the question was phrased then, that if he is an in-betweener, then what does that make all of us? A Rasha? Every single one of us is a Rasha because we don't study Torah the entire day? Because in order to be an in-betweener, you have to be like Rabbah. Right? So we want to try to understand that. Question number 5. Why did Job say that God created tzaddikim, which seems to violate the notion of free choice? To be answered in chapter 14. That was the question where we examined. In other words, we dissected his terminology, the language that he uses. He doesn't say barata tzaddik, barata rasha, right? If Job would have said, you created a tzaddik and you created a rasha, how would that be understood? What does that mean? So, essentially... No, 1 second. We're going to examine his language right now. That's okay, please. When someone says, he created a tzaddik and he created a rasha, they're not talking about a specific person. They're talking about a term or a title or a status, and it can be achieved by whoever would like, right? But that's exactly. Very good. Thank you. He created the concept. Then Job would have been telling God, "You created the concept of a tzaddik and the concept of a rasha." But when he uses the plural, you created tzaddikim and you created rishaim, right? In other words, you created tzaddiks and you created rashas. What is he essentially saying? Not concept anymore. You created people who are tzaddikim, and you created people who are rishayim. Really? I thought it's open to each and every one of us, right? Doesn't the soul come down here into this world and have a choice whether it can be a tzaddik or rasha? How can Job in Tanakh, right? This is not, a light-hearted book where somebody just came up with a concept. No, this is in Tanakh. It's quoted that God created tzaddikim and created rishayim. That was question 5, right? And number 14. And finally, this will lead us to answer the Tanya's opening question, which is question number 6. Why was your soul made to swear an oath before you were born? Be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha, etc., which will also be answered in chapter 14. Right? Again, tying into this question about freedom of choice, how can you make a soul swear that it will be a tzaddik or a rasha? It doesn't know. It will come down into this world and it will work and it will toil to be the best it can be. Right?
Taking away its free choice.
Again?
Taking away its free choice.
If you make it swear, then that implies that somehow the soul should know in advance. Right?
Would like to be.
But that's not what it says. It says to be. Yeah. It doesn't say mashbi'in oto shetishtadel liot tzadik, right? That you should try your hardest. Mm-hmm. We make the soul swear that it should give it its best. No, you should be a tzaddik, you should be a rasha. All right. So that's just a recapping of all the questions and how they'll be answered over the next few chapters. Okay. So now you should already have a little bit of a grasp as to how these questions are going to be answered in chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10 is titled the Tzadik. Chapter 11 is titled the Rasha. In other words, what we're going to do now is, now that we understand that there's an animal soul and that there's a godly soul, how they work, how they operate, how they function in this world, and we understand that there's a war between them and how that war operates, Now we're going to talk about victory. In chapter 10, we're going to talk about victory of the godly soul. In other words, that will be a tzaddik. And in chapter 11, we're going to talk about victory of the animalistic soul, which will be the rasha. But most importantly, we're going to talk about the fact that it's never permanent. Meaning there's always, right? Everybody can have their little moments in their lives, as we know. In this moment, their godly soul is being victorious, and in this moment, their animalistic soul is being victorious. All right? So we begin, people?
Yes.
Okay. So the question we're addressing today is the first question mentioned here, which is, what is the difference between a complete tzaddik and an incomplete tzaddik? Okay, so this is a quote from, hold on, I'll look it up. Right, we're going to analyze this question. It was brought down in chapter 1. In the Talmud, in the Brachot, on page 7a, I quote, Tzadik v'tovlo. The Talmud is describing 5 categories of people or 5 categories of statuses that a human being can fall under. Tzadik v'tovlo, a tzaddik that is good to him, or a tzaddik who has it good. Tzadik v'ralo, a tzaddik who has it bad, right? Rasha v'tovlo, a rasha who has it good, and rasha v'ralo, and a rasha who has it bad, and the beinoni, the in-betweener. What does it mean, right? So today's discussion is the tzaddik who has it good and the tzaddik who has it bad, right? What does it mean someone who has it good and someone who has it bad? So the simple translation, the literal translation is that sometimes you find someone who seems to be the biggest tzaddik, right? Seems to be such a righteous person, does everything right. You never catch him saying a bad word about someone. You never catch him getting angry at someone. You never catch him, heaven forbid, stealing, raping, murdering, etc., right? And he's constantly occupied with holy thought, speech, and action. And yet, even when we talk about such types of people, we all know that sometimes you find these people and they have great lives. They live such beautiful lives. They have beautiful families, and they have a good livelihood, and they're able to support their families, and they have where to live, and they have meaning in life, etc. Right? And they lead nice, beautiful lives. Sometimes we see those people. This always bothers us, right? Why do bad things happen to good people, right? Sometimes we see these people, they're such amazing people. Why does God do this to them? And you hear that they lost a daughter when their daughter was 3 years old, right? Or you hear that they, went through something horrible in their lives, right? You think to yourself, why would this happen? Right? This is what, so on a literal level, this is what we mean by tzaddik v'tovlo, a tzaddik who has it good in this world, and tzaddik v'ralo, a tzaddik who does not have it good in this world. Okay? In other words, what is the simple explanation behind this? The simple explanation given, I believe, also in the Talmud, is that a tzaddik v'tovlo, tzaddik who has it good in this world, is tzaddik gamur, a complete tzaddik. What does that mean? Why a complete tzaddik?
That rid of all the bad in his life.
So we're going to talk about that now. What the status of a tzaddik gamur is, right? But what does it mean that a tzaddik who has it good in this world is a complete tzaddik? Why? Because he is a tzaddik who has it even good in this world. Right? Who even has it good in this world, that is a sign that he is a complete tzaddik. Let's start with the incomplete tzaddik. This will be easier, right? Why do we say that a tzaddik that has it bad in this world is an incomplete tzaddik? Because essentially what we say is as follows. This man is an amazing person. He mainly does mitzvot in his life. There is a slight little bit of negativity left in his life. Maybe that sometimes he does good things, but he doesn't have the best intentions. He's always kind to people, but sometimes he's kind to people and he doesn't really want to be kind to people, right? You have to understand, this is the bad in this person's life, right? And maybe he has these little slight nuances of let's call it evil, right? In his life left, so something has to be done about them. Now, in the world to come, he will get the ultimate reward because God wants to give him complete reward in the world to come. And there's just he needs to take care of a drop of bad that's in his life. So God says to him, you know what? I'll give it to you in this world. Won't be such a big deal. And this world is really considered the easier way to get rid of things. Pain in this world, or suffering in this world, or having things not so easy in this world is the easier way to get rid of to fix things. When you come to the world to come, things get much rougher. Right? We spoke about this a couple lessons ago, right? That when the soul comes up, you know, like it says in ethics of our fathers, litain din v'cheshbon, to give a calculation, right? So it's much worse if you have to wait for the world to come to take care of these things. So a tzaddik v'ralo, a tzaddik who has it bad in this world, essentially, right? And again, it's not for us to judge what it is in his life, right? But if we're talking here in theory, then we can talk. So must be there's some things very slight in his life which he's done, which might not be the most up to par and up to scratch and perfectly, beautiful, and therefore he has it at least a little bit bad in this world. So on the flip side, a tzaddik who has it good in this world, he is a complete tzaddik. He doesn't even have these slight nuances of evil in his life.
So why is he here?
Why is he here? That is a very good question. But I think it's predicated on a mistaken notion. Elaborate on the question? What's the question? Why is he here?
If he is not tikkun, why is he coming to this place?
So I think the basis for your question is based on a Jewish and explained Chassidut concept, which is that every human being comes out into this world. Every Jew comes out into this world and has his neshama has a particular mission that he needs to fulfill in this world, right? He needs to better himself to a certain degree, right? And if he completes himself, if he's a complete person, right? So then he's done. Okay, so there's two mistakes with that notion. Number one is that the war is never over, and we're going to talk about this in this chapter, okay? And I knew that's the one you would easier to understand. Why? Because it still fits into the basis of your question, which is basically that each person has their own part of themselves that they need to correct themselves. Now, so the answer is just because he is right now an ultimate tzaddik doesn't mean that in 1 minute from now he'll be an ultimate tzaddik. Every person, right? Meaning, what did we say about freedom of choice? Freedom of choice is never taken away. Just because someone is a tzaddik and he's eradicated all evil from his life, this doesn't mean that in 1 more minute from now he can't do evil. He still could. He has that ability. The freedom of choice is never taken away. Okay, number one. Number two, and much more important, is you skipped one section, which is that every person has in this world their portion within themselves and their portion in this world which is outside of themselves, and their mission is made up of those two things. In other words, to refine a certain portion of themselves. Maybe if one day we'll talk about reincarnation, which I think as part of Tanya eventually we'll get to it, right? We'll talk about the fact that people's neshamas sometimes come down over and over and over again. Right? Anybody heard of this concept before?
Yes.
That their neshama, their soul, comes down to this world multiple times. And each time is because it's refining a different part of the neshama. Right? So on a simple level, let's say that that's what it means, refining your portion in your own life. Right? But then besides that, there is what's called chelko ba'olam, which means his portion in the world. He has a portion of the world to uplift. If you've ever heard a story of a man who goes to some place, a woman who goes to some place, and they think they're flying to Australia, and then they get rerouted, and they end up in some country that godforsaken place. There's barely any Jews in the whole country there, right? And all of a sudden they find out that no, there was never a Jew in the whole world that ever made, let's say, a bracha on food. Or never learned Torah. This particular place in the world never had Torah learned in it, right? And it was this person's mission. That's why he was rerouted, yada yada yada, right, etc. Without getting into all the stories that there are out there.